The first thing Caleb Mercer saw that scorching summer morning was bare feet in the dust, pressed against his barn like somebody had nailed them there. For one hard second, his hand drifted toward his belt, and the thought that came with it wasn't mercy. The girl didn't scream. She just stared, clutching a fistful of dry palmetto leaves to her chest, like that was the only law left in the world. Her cheek was swollen, her knee was purpled, and her eyes looked older than 21 should ever look. Caleb crouched close enough that a passerby might have sworn he was about to do something wicked. The girl's lips shook, then steadied. She whispered the sentence that made Caleb's throat go dry. "My father sneaks in every night." Her voice cracked, but it held, like she'd rehearsed it 100 times. Caleb didn't ask which father. Instead, he stared at the barn door, as if the darkness inside might answer for her. Then he set his coat on the ground, slid it toward her with 2 fingers, and forced his voice to come out calm. It was summer outside Trinidad, Colorado, the kind of heat that baked the prairie flat and turned a man's patience brittle. Caleb was 55, a rancher with wind-cracked hands, and a face that had learned to hide worry behind squint lines. He'd come to this old barn to mend a hinge, and to be alone for a spell, because loneliness was quieter than town talk. Now there was a young woman pinned to his boards, shaken like a spooked colt, and he could feel the day tipping into trouble. A man's word was about to matter more than his comfort, and Caleb knew it. She kept the leaves tight, and she wouldn't take the coat until he leaned back and angled his body away from her. Caleb reached for his canteen, slow and careful, and poured a little water into the cap. Caleb nodded once and kept his voice low, because loud voices were for cattle, not for someone who'd been cornered. "All right," he said. "You're safe right here, and I won't touch you, unless you ask." She swallowed, and her gaze slid past him, to the open land, and the long road that led toward Raton Pass. If her father was the kind of man folks respected, then the first thing Trinidad would put on trial was her truth. "Tell me your name," he said, "and tell me who you can't go back to." Caleb didn't push for more. He just rose slow and kept his body turned so she could breathe. She said her name was Eliza Hart, and the way she said Hart sounded like a bruise. When he asked who she couldn't go back to, she swallowed hard and nodded toward town. She didn't say the man's name yet, but she said he was the kind of man folks tip their hats to. Caleb had seen that kind before. Clean cuffs in daylight, dirty hands after dark. He told her to stay low, and he led his horse the long way, keeping the barn between her and the open road. He got her to the edge of Trinidad by late afternoon, and the heat still clung like a wet shirt. He didn't take her to the sheriff's door, because the first thing a town does is protect its own story. Instead, he took her behind Lottie Pierce's boarding house, where the kitchen door squeaked and the gossip stayed outside. She looked at Eliza once, and she didn't ask foolish questions. She just said, "Come on in, honey." Caleb stepped out front to buy salve and bread soft enough to eat, and he kept his eyes down like a man hiding sin. That was when he saw the notice board and felt his stomach drop. It wasn't a wanted poster yet. It was a missing notice with Eliza's name and a reward printed bold. Under that clean print, somebody had added fresh ink, "Runaway daughter, likely confused, reward for safe return to loving father." And he'd seen towns do this before, turn a frightened young woman into a problem so decent men could stop asking questions. Across the street, Silas Hart stood in the shade, dressed neat as Sunday, talking gentle to Deputy Wade Kincaid. Silas looked straight at Caleb and smiled like he already knew where the girl was hiding. Silas held his hands like a grieving father, and his voice looked gentle from a distance, but his eyes were hunting, and Wade was smiling like a man counting money. Caleb turned away, and he didn't run, because running would only prove their lie. He walked straight toward the saloon, and he knew one thing for sure. They were already waiting for him inside. Men looked up from their cards, pausing mid-deal. A few faces turned away too fast, like they already knew the script. He saw Deputy Wade Kincaid near the bar, and Wade smiled like a man with a script. Caleb eased to Tom's table, and he spoke low enough to keep it private. He said there was a young woman hiding, and she was scared of going home. He said the man she feared wore respect like a clean shirt. Tom said a town runs on proof, and proof takes patience. Caleb didn't like it, but he knew the law had to walk before it could run. Across the room, Wade leaned close to a loud-mouthed ranch hand, and Caleb saw money change hands. That ranch hand stood up slow and turned toward Caleb like a rooster looking for blood. He called Caleb a kidnapper, and he painted Silas as a decent father to the whole room. A few men laughed, and a few men shifted their stools closer. Caleb felt the trap close, and he hated how easy it was. He tried to step back, but another man cut off the space behind him. The ranch hand shoved him anyway, and beer splashed across Caleb's shirt. Caleb stayed calm, but calm only works on calm men. Caleb swung once more, and he made it count because counting mattered now. No knives came out, and no guns came out, because Caleb kept moving and kept it tight. Tom stood up at last, and his voice cut through the mess like a cold creek. Tom ordered everyone back, and for a moment they listened because Marshall meant something. Wade stepped in quick, and he put iron on Caleb with a grin. Wade said it was for disturbing the peace, and he said it loud for the room. Caleb didn't fight the cuffs, because fighting would sell Wade's lie. Tom met Caleb's eyes once, and Caleb saw a question there, not a judgment. Caleb got marched outside, and the whole street watched like it was a show. If you like true-to-life stories where a man's word still counts, hit like and subscribe. Now pour some tea, take a slow sip, and tell me what time it is and where you're listening from. Then outside the jail, Caleb heard Wade promise Silas something for tonight. And Caleb knew Eliza was running out of hours. Caleb sat on the bunk and listened to the jail settle into its night noises. He kept his face calm for the deputy on duty, but inside his chest, time was turning mean. Marshal Tom Brannigan came back after midnight, not loud, not friendly, just steady. Caleb told him what he heard. Wade promising Silas something for tonight. Tom's eyes narrowed, and he asked one question that mattered. Did Caleb have a reason to think Silas wanted the girl silenced right now? Caleb said yes, and he said it like a man staking his name on it. Tom walked out, and he didn't return for what felt like hours. Caleb paced the cell, listening to the night, counting every creak like it was a warning. When Tom came back, he had paper in his hand and a tired look on his eyes. He said he dug it up from the county records office, a land deed tied to the Hart name down near the Purgatoire River, and Wade's signature sat there as witness, neat as day, dirty as sin. Caleb didn't smile, because the proof wasn't enough yet. It was a trail, and trails only matter if you follow them to the end. Tom arranged Caleb's release the clean way, a simple bond and a quiet warning. His eyes showed the weight of years wearing that badge. Caleb agreed because the only punch that mattered now was the one that landed in a courtroom. They went to Lottie Pierce's boarding house by the back way, where the kitchen light leaked through a crack in the door. Lottie let them in, eyes sharp, jaw set, like she'd been waiting for this moment her whole life, like she'd learned long ago what a decent woman does, when a bad man thinks nobody will stop him. Eliza stayed behind the wall by the pantry, and she didn't step out until Caleb spoke her name softly. Tom kept his distance, hat in his hands, voice low, showing her he wasn't there to own her story. Lottie brought out what she had found tucked in a flour tin, a receipt for money, signed by Wade, and a second paper that pointed straight at the Hart land. It wasn't pretty proof, but it was real, and real was all Tom needed to start a fire. They set the trap without calling it a trap. Caleb stood near the stable yard, where his horse could see him, and where anyone watching might think he was alone. The summer night was thick, and the boards creaked with every warm gust. Then footsteps came, careful and familiar, the kind that believed they had every right to be there. A shadow slipped into the yard, then another right behind it. Caleb's heart thumped once, hard. If they spotted him too soon, it was over, and Eliza would pay the price for his mistake. Caleb recognized Silas Hart by the way he carried himself, proud even when he was sneaking, and behind Silas came Deputy Wade Kincaid, quiet as a snake, close enough to prove this was never just a family matter. Caleb held still, and let them step into the light, because sometimes the only way to beat a liar is to let him talk first. Silas raised his hand toward the latch, steady, like he owned the night. And Caleb waited, because the next breath would decide everything. Silas lifted his hand toward that door, and Caleb finally understood what Eliza meant by owned. Before Silas could touch the latch, Marshal Tom stepped out of the shadow, and his voice turned the night cold. Wade reached for his authority, but authority looks small when it is standing beside a liar. Lottie held up the papers, and the receipt with Wade's signature did the talking nobody could undo. Eliza did not rush forward. She stayed behind the wall, and she let the truth walk out first. Silas tried to sound like a father, but his words tripped over the facts, and his eyes never once looked at her with love. Tom put irons on both men, and for the first time in years, Eliza heard footsteps that were leaving. Morning came hot and bright, and Trinidad acted like it always does. It gathered to watch. Silas tried one last trick. He called Caleb a thief, and he called Eliza a troublemaker. Tom did not argue with noise. He answered with records and a witness from the freight office who had seen Wade sign for that money. Wade broke for the crowd, and Caleb moved. Caleb caught him and brought him down without cruelty, because this story was not about revenge. It was about ending a long night, so a young woman could finally sleep. Silas was taken away, and his town made room for the truth it had refused to hold. Eliza did not get her years back, but she got something rarer. She got a tomorrow that belonged to her. Caleb did not ask for praise. He only made sure her land papers stayed in her hands and her name stayed clean. That is the part people forget about justice. It is not a single loud moment. It is a chain of small choices that do not break. A good man doesn't need applause. He needs the spine to do right when it costs him. If you believe a man's word still matters, hit like and subscribe for more true-to-life frontier tales. Now let me ask you something. Would you have believed the town's reputation or the fear in Eliza's eyes? And what is a man supposed to protect first, his name or what is right? If you were Caleb, would you stand alone when the whole street wanted you quiet?